Oh, you've made it at last. You, the one they claimed to have under control. The one they kept an eye on from the darkness of rooms you never entered. The one they dissected behind forced civility and manicured tables. The person they thought would never notice how conversations changed the instant your name came up. Take a seat, because someone finally lost it on their side. They didn't simply slip when they did. They exploded. Everything was lost. Their cohesiveness, their strategy, their poise. They also revealed who has been pursuing you and why in the aftermath of their breakdown. Like a thread being pulled by trembling hands, names, motivations, and entire schemes were revealed. It wasn't an accident that emerged. You're going to learn every detail they hoped you wouldn't learn about this long overdue catastrophe. Underneath their well-coordinated act, there was tension that was silent, uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to appear weak first. Nobody wanted to admit that they had been losing power over you for months. However, pressure compresses rather than evaporates, and the person who claimed to be the calmest was the one who broke in the end. They stood up, banged their palms on the table, and yelled your name as if it were a warning bell rather than a human being. The space went cold. They had no intention of disclosing anything. The length of time they had been operating this business was not to be disclosed. It was forbidden for them to express their dread. However, terror didn't ask for permission and has its own schedule. The meltdown was chaotic, not well planned, not tastefully theatrical, simply pure terror. Everything was shouted out. The person who planned the smear campaigns researched your triggers, kept an eye on your internet interactions, and rewrote tales about you before you could say a word. They revealed the secret network of individuals who were told to control, monitor, and restrain you. It seemed like they were expelling poison from their lungs, with each word coming out jagged and furious. The others were at a loss for what to do. The moment honesty began to seep into the room, they stared in amazement and horror, knowing that the surgery had been destroyed. Let's discuss the reasons behind this. Not only did they lose control of the strategy, they also lost control of themselves. Because the reality is uncomfortable. They weren't aiming for a weak person. Wasn't that person predictable? Wasn't someone who could be forced into difficult emotional situations and abandoned there. They anticipated that you would shatter in ways that made sense to them. They anticipated that you would react to pressure in the same way as everyone else under their supervision. However, you don't behave as they anticipate, and that uncertainty caused a fissure in their self-confidence that grew larger over time until someone eventually broke too easily. The ringleader who started the entire operation constructed the plan on the premise that you would react, lash out, disintegrate, spiral, or confront. They wanted your response to defend what they did. To support their story, they required you to be confused. However, the framework of their plan started to fall apart when you stopped participating, took a step back, and began mending without their help. Your outcome was no longer under their control. More than anything, they were afraid because they were witnessing you rebuild without them. Something unsettling but rewarding was revealed by the confession. You were never the issue. The reflection was you, mirrored the fears they were unable to face. You mirrored their dread of being irrelevant, of being discovered, and of losing their power. They sought to break that mirror by focusing on you since they couldn't tolerate it. However, when you smash a mirror, it multiplies rather than dies. Each broken fragment reveals a more acute reality. They were besieged by those facts till one of them eventually let out a scream. They acknowledged that they had planted people close to you, but they weren't physically dangerous. Rather, they were strategically placed emotionally. People who appeared nice, helpful, interested, and supportive. People who pretended to find you by chance as if they were drawn to your energy by accident. These weren't coincidences, though. These were assignments and placements. People are instructed to watch you, gather data, decipher patterns, and pinpoint your weaknesses. They were instructed to come back with information that might be used against you in the future. This, however, is the portion that ruined their business. The majority of those planted people did not succeed. You didn't give them anything to take advantage of, so they returned empty-handed. They expected you to give them emotional leverage, but you didn't. You kept the wounds they were looking for hidden. A few of them even changed sides inside themselves. They had to face aspects of themselves that they weren't prepared to address when they spent time with you. They had phases to their strategy that were meticulously planned, recorded, and practiced. Phase 1 involves emotionally isolating you, removing your networks of support, causing others to distrust you, and causing you to doubt yourself. They orchestrated conversations that portrayed you as challenging, erratic, or dramatic, whispered into the proper ears, and supported particular viewpoints. However, you didn't give up and didn't look for answers. You adjusted, and the isolation they set up as a trap gave you strength. The integrity of their scheme was destroyed by that alone. Provoke you in Phase 2. Press your buttons until you have a negative reaction. Anger, tears, defensive actions, anything that would support their charges were what they sought. But it was unsettling how restrained you were. You failed to respond to their lure. They set emotional traps, but you avoided them. They started to feel threatened by that restriction. Manipulators lose their map when you don't respond. Take charge of the story in Phase 3. In order to sound cohesive and credible in the event of a query, they practice lines about you, coordinated stories, synchronized versions of events, and practiced facial expressions. However, narrative control breaks down as soon as the reality is revealed, and one of their group members made a fatal mistake, not once, but twice. Replace you in Phase 4, introduce replacements to prove you're not needed, and bring in fresh people to take over the role or the role you be. However, when the original isn't playing a part, replacements never work. You're just being who you are. They brought in individuals who lacked your presence, depth, awareness, and endurance. As you stood up, the replacements broke under the strain. They didn't find the comparison flattering. Someone yelled during the confession, "We shouldn't have let it get this far." Another muttered, "We underestimated them." Finally, someone whispered, "We lost control the moment they stopped caring." This statement silenced the group since it revealed the truth they had been attempting to ignore. Once you emotionally distanced yourself from them, you cut off their influence. Additionally, they lacked a plan for someone who wasn't scared to lead. Something deeper was revealed by the meltdown. Fear masquerading as accountability, jealousy masquerading as compassion, and projection masquerading as defense. You were never singled out because of who you were. They targeted you because of who they weren't, and they felt like they were getting smaller as they watched you develop. So out of desperation rather than hatred, they devised a strategy to keep you in check. It was their comfort, not your welfare, that they were attempting to safeguard. But when pressure strikes, comfort crumbles, and it struck them hard. They acknowledged that they had sabotaged your opportunities, encouraged others to avoid you, misreported what you said, exaggerated your errors, downplayed your accomplishments, and created circumstances that made you appear unstable or untrustworthy. They introduced uncertainty into areas where you should feel secure. Through meticulous editing, they turned your advantages into disadvantages. However, editing is only effective when the original is defective. Their distortions appeared careless because of your genuineness. During the meltdown, one member said, "We built this entire plan on the assumption they'd fall apart, but they didn't," and the person sitting next to them responded, "We fell apart instead." Hearing that truth aloud destroyed what little unity they had left. You survived their plan because you weren't taking part in it. They were fighting a war you didn't even know existed, while you were creating a life unrelated to their fears. The most crucial part is that they revealed who initiated it, but they haven't yet revealed who expanded it. This drama has layers, and the meltdown only revealed the core. The names of the outer rings, the people influenced by the central players, and the people who joined the operation without realizing the original motive haven't surfaced yet, but they will. The confession has already begun to unravel the structure. Once one person reveals the truth, others will follow, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. The bomb they dropped wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. They acknowledged that the plan wasn't finished, that it was still in progress, that there were still actions they planned to take, strategies they were waiting to implement, and stories they were getting ready to tell. However, now that the confession has shattered their unity, their timing is off, their communication is compromised, their mutual trust is eroding, and the carefully crafted plan is disintegrating piece by piece. This is where things get beautifully chaotic. The meltdown set off an internal witch hunt. They are no longer united, they are suspicious, paranoid, and blaming each other for things they all participated in. The moment one person confessed, their hierarchy fell apart, and now everyone is pointing fingers trying to figure out who will be the next to break, terrified of being exposed as deeper participants in the dirty plan targeting you. Some of them were not heavily involved at first, but guilt pulls people in, because they were weak and enjoyed watching someone else get cornered. Ironically, when the bomb went off in that room, people's true selves came out violently. One person began hyperventilating, another demanded names, another tried to rewrite their involvement by lying about who did what, and still another pretended they always disagreed with the plan, even though they had been among the loudest voices pushing it forward weeks earlier. It was not only satisfying to watch them scramble, but it was also instructive, revealing the emotional architecture behind the operation. Fear at the top, insecurity as the foundation, and envy woven into the walls. They acknowledged that they had backup plans in place in case the main plan failed, that they had secondary characters ready to be activated, that they had additional rumors waiting to be released, that they had emotional traps already drafted, that they weren't improvising, and that they were planning how to make you appear unstable when their original blueprint failed. However, everything came crashing down when truth slipped into the wrong moment. Truth is a ruthless force, and once it enters a room, it refuses to leave quietly. The architects were the main brains behind the operation, the ones who created the plan. The assistants were the ones who carried out tasks, spread narratives, collected information, and manipulated interactions. And the accidental recruits were the people who were not even aware that they were being used to reinforce someone else's agenda. They were encouraged to keep an eye on you without understanding what that phrase really meant. And they were manipulated into participating without being told the full story. Let's examine exactly what they admitted next, because this is where things go from being filthy to downright ridiculous. The meltdown revealed all three layers, but not all of them yet. They revealed the architects, the main strategist, and even one assistant who panicked first. However, the accidental recruits are the ones who will gradually come to light, one by one, as the unraveling goes on. Some will confess out of guilt, some out of fear, some out of a desire to distance themselves before someone else names them, and some won't confess at all. They'll just vanish from the periphery of your life, hoping you won't see the pattern. The confession also revealed something else. The plan had a timeline. They expected you to break months ago. They expected you to give them reactions they could twist. They expected you to panic, lash out, collapse emotionally. They built an entire arc based on predicting your downfall, but they miscalculated your strength so severely that their predictions became useless. You didn't collapse, you didn't give them the tremor they needed, you didn't fall into the emotional traps that would allow them to say, "See, we told you." As a result, their entire story collapsed. They acknowledged something unsettling but inadvertently humorous. They held emergency meetings over your silence. Indeed, they were alarmed since you were not responding. One of them asked, "Why are they taking action?" Another said, "Maybe they don't know what we did." A third person muttered, "No, they are aware. That's what frightens me. Your composure turned into a threat, your inaction turned into ammo, and your emotional restraint was the blow they were unprepared for." They had plans for turmoil, drama, and confrontation, but they had no plan for self-respect. Ironically, the very thing they attempted to use as a weapon against you pressure caused their meltdown. They set up a high-stress environment for you in the hopes that you would break first, but all that pressure bounced back on them, gradually destroying their unity until someone broke. Structure is revealed by pressure, and their operation's structure was so brittle that one confession destroyed it. The room turned into a battlefield after the initial explosion, with people yelling over each other, accusing each other of going too far, not going far enough, starting the plan, ruining the plan, executing the plan poorly, losing control of the plan, misreading your reactions, misjudging your strength, spreading the wrong narratives, and trusting the wrong people. Suddenly, everyone was a victim. Everyone was blaming everyone else, and everyone was rewriting history. But there was no way to change the truth that had already been said. This was one of the most damn the faces of at least 3 people. Nothing was effective. They don't shatter. They don't answer. They don't react. And the room fell silent because the truth was clear. They lost momentum when you put your development ahead of their drama. They lost control when you chose peace over panic. And they lost power when you retreated rather than falling into their trap. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting their own incapacity to shake you. The story goes deeper, though, as the meltdown revealed the next phase of the plan, not the present, but the future. They acknowledged that they were waiting for the right moment to reactivate certain elements. They had people who were supposed to approach you again at strategic moments. They had narratives they planned to reintroduce when you least expected it. They had emotional angles they wanted to exploit later. But those strategies are now in ruins because the confession forced a collapse in trust. They are unable to coordinate without wondering who is secretly recording, who is secretly panicking, and nothing destroys a covert operation more quickly than internal mistrust. But what one person acknowledged in a moment of total emotional fatigue is the most chaotic element, the one that reveals how badly their plan went out of control. We didn't just target them, we became obsessed with them. That line cracked the room open in a different way because obsession is different from strategy. Strategy is clean, obsession is messy, strategy is structured, obsession is compulsive. Strategy is controlled, obsession is dangerous. And what they confessed wasn't calculated, it was compulsive. They couldn't stop talking about you. They couldn't stop analyzing you. They couldn't stop tracking your progress. They couldn't stop watching your silence. You became the ghost living in their decision-making. That admission turned the room into a confession chamber. Someone else groaned, holding their face like the truth finally stepped on their chest. They were supposed to fade, they said. Why didn't they fade? Because we created the obsession ourselves, a second person said. And that's when reality hit them all at once. They weren't hunters, rather they were addicts. Addicted to the delusion that they could control you. Addicted to the fantasy that controlling your surroundings would shape your behavior. And addicted to the idea that you were predictable. This addiction is precisely what caused their plan to fall apart, because obsession is careless. Blurs boundaries, pushes people to prolong operations longer than necessary, and makes them escalate, even when escalation is dangerous. And that's exactly what they did. The confession deepened when another voice in the room acknowledged that they had been checking on you more often than anyone else, not out of strategy, but out of anxiety. They claimed that they kept an eye on your online presence because they felt uncomfortable when you vanished, as if your silence somehow threatened their sense of control. They were unaware of the irony that the very thing they were trying to take from you, autonomy, was the very thing they lost within themselves. They became prisoners of their own obsession, unable to act without first wondering how you would react, even if you didn't respond at all. Their plan consumed them more than it had ever touched you. One assistant acknowledged that every time you appeared worn out or overwhelmed, they felt relieved. Not because they wanted you hurt, but because it reassured them that their plan was working. However, your resilience also destroyed that small illusion. The moment you pulled yourself together, found clarity, found calm, and found grounding, they panicked, because nothing is more terrifying to people who want control than someone who rises from the ashes they set for them. They expected exhaustion to last, confusion to linger, and emotional instability to ensnap their plot by refusing to remain broken. Another confessed something even more sinister, something that caused the room to tilt. They claimed to have started conversations about you even though nothing had happened. to have exaggerated small moments, to have magnified neutral events, and to have twisted ordinary interactions into dramatized narratives because they needed material to keep the operation going. However, exaggeration requires fuel, and when you stopped giving them anything to work with, their content dried up, their ammunition evaporated, and they ran out of reasons to justify their obsession. When a liar runs out of lies, the lies start to turn against them. Here's the part they never wanted to be revealed. They didn't just target your reputation. Their real goal was to disrupt you internally rather than destroy you externally. They hoped that by creating enough shadows in conversations, dynamics, and social circles, you would start to doubt your instincts. However, the irony is that the more they attempted to distort your perception, the clearer you became. You sharpened when the environment became strange. You became observant when people started acting unpredictable. You detached when energy changed, and their attempt to destabilize you only made you more accurate. They genuinely thought you would remain in place long enough for their plan to succeed. But people who are targeted often accelerate evolution. That's something they never accounted for. Pressure can crush some, but the right person, pressure forges them. You weren't the type to fold. You were the type to sharpen. One of the members in the room muttered something like, "They weren't supposed to evolve this fast." Confessions didn't put an end to the chaos. Instead, it got worse. Someone accused the architect of dragging everyone into a catastrophe from which there was no way out. Another pointed out that the plan was unethical from the start. Still another snapped that they warned this would backfire, and they started to split into factions: guilt, denial, panic, and self-preservation. Meanwhile, the ringleader sat in silence, realizing that the plan wasn't just ruined. The ringleader finally exploded because their lack of response was the girouasse. That line said it all. Your inaction caused more harm to their operation than any counterattack could have. You broke their formula by simply failing to perform your assigned role. You weren't reactive, you weren't unstable, you didn't plead, you didn't chase, you didn't try to fix what they purposefully broke. Your stillness made fun of their strategy. Your peace insulted their design, and your silence caused their collapse. The story goes deeper, though, as each of them realized after the meltdown that they had underestimated the psychological force they were dealing with. They acknowledged that they never truly understood you. They only understood the version of you they created, and that version broke under pressure. However, the real you, on the other hand, didn't break. Instead, it adapted, looked at the mess, the manipulation, the betrayal, and decided to rebuild rather than react. Your self-control proved to be their downfall. "We thought they were the weak one," was the statement that stopped even the loudest voices. It turns out that we were the weak ones. That statement was more than just the truth. It was a funeral, because once someone acknowledges that they are the weaker force, the fight is over. You won a war you were unaware was taking place without using a single weapon. This is the point at which the collapsing operation becomes dangerous. Not for you, but for them. They are aware that the truth is out there, that more people will crack, and that secrets gain momentum once they get out. As a result, they are frantically trying to find ways to contain the fallout. Some are trying to change memories. Some are trying to privately apologize without acknowledging guilt. Some are distancing themselves publicly. Some are erasing evidence. Some are pretending they were never involved. And some, the most terrified, are getting ready to betray everyone in order to protect themselves. The unraveling is no longer theoretical, it is happening in real time. The confession was only the first domino. The next will be the expansion, the revelation of who else was involved and how deep it went. Internal fear always leads to external revelations, and those who feel their reputation is most at risk are the ones who spill the fastest. They are afraid of one thing now: exposure, because it ruins everything they thought they could protect. Exposure doesn't threaten you, it threatens them. You survive the targeting, but they won't survive the truth about the targeting. This is precisely why the next stage of the collapse is much uglier than the first. The first confession was emotional, impulsive, and a breakdown, but what's coming next is strategic self-preservation. They're not confessing because they feel bad. Rather, they're confessing because they want to save themselves, and that kind of fear makes people reckless, revealing things they once vowed to take to the grave, talking faster than their brains can process, and in the rush to protect their names, they will end up exposing those behind them, those next to them, and those above them. This is the beauty of a collapsing once the seal is broken. Once the seal is broken. Once the seal is broken. This is where the revealed chaos is. People in the outer ring, who thought they were safe because they didn't do much, are beginning to panic. Some are desperately trying to distance themselves, rewriting their roles in their minds, convincing themselves that involvement is optional if they simply deny it loudly. Others are pretending they were tricked into participating, claiming ignorance of responsibility. Finally, there are the people who are quietly switching sides, the ones who now want to align with you because they sense which way the wind is blowing. These people are the most dangerous, not because they are about to leak information in an effort to appear innocent. It's not guilt, it's fear. Fear of being named, fear of being dragged into the ripple effect of the confession, fear of being associated with the losing side, and something darkly humorous about watching them scramble to rewrite their moral identities, as if they can magically transform themselves into uninvolved bystanders with a few strategic smiles and half-hearted apologies. People who once avoided eye contact will suddenly seem nervous around you. People who once participated in whispers will become extremely polite. But the deeper unraveling that's coming from the core group, the architects and assistants who are knee-deep in the plan, their fear isn't soft and social. Their fear is existential. They know the confession didn't just expose one action, it exposed an entire mindset. It exposed their intentions, their desires, their motives. They are losing more than their image. They are losing the illusion of power they built over years. And once an illusion cracks, people stop fearing it. One of them already tried to gather the remaining participants in a private meeting to stabilize the situation. The irony is almost comedic. The same group that coordinated strategies to destabilize you is now collapsing because one member destabilized them. They sat in that room trying to piece together a story that would make them look like victims, not aggressors. They tried to create a counter-narrative, blaming the person who confessed, calling them dramatic, sensitive, exaggerating. But every attempt at rewriting the story fell flat because the truth was already out. You can't put a bomb back together after it explodes. Their next attempt was even more desperate. They tried to convince each other that you probably don't know the full extent of what was said, that maybe the confession didn't reach your ears, that maybe they still have time to regroup, but panic gives people away. The moment someone said, "We need to figure out what they know," the room fell apart again, because that sentence revealed the one thing no one wanted to say out loud. They're no longer worried about controlling your perception. They're worried about being held accountable for theirs. The funniest part, they still think they can outrun a truth that's already sprinting ahead of them. They still believe they can manipulate the aftermath the same way they tried to manipulate the storyline. But truth has a strange way of amplifying itself. Once it leaves someone's mouth, it grows legs. It moves into conversations, into whispers, into the spaces between people. It replicates. And the more they try to contain it, the louder it becomes. One assistant who pledged allegiance to the core group is already thinking about flipping. They're afraid because they weren't just involved, they were enthusiastic. They helped construct the operation brick by brick. They disseminated stories with conviction. They eagerly gathered information. They carried out tasks without hesitation. But now they're realizing they were nothing more than a tool. They did the dirty work while the architects kept their hands clean. And this assistant, driven by betrayal, resentment, and panic, is on the verge of retaliation. The mastermind behind the whole scheme, one of the architects, is unraveling the fastest because they are afraid of losing control rather than getting caught. Their entire identity was built on the delusion that they could predict and shape outcomes, But your unpredictability has become the ever-widening crack in their foundation. You don't understand how you got past their tactics, how you recovered without their consent, how their sabotage turned into your evolution, and now they're afraid of you. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're unburdenable. This is where the dark humor begins. These individuals were unprepared for the repercussions of their own actions. They set the trap, constructed the story, and created the manipulation. But when the fallout came, they pretended to be shocked, acting as though the truth comes with a warning label, as though exposure requires permission, and as though accountability is optional. They wanted to be puppet masters, but they forgot that puppeteers can't control the show when the strings snap. The deeper layer, the one they hoped no one would ever discover, reveals that the targeting wasn't just coordinated. It was personal, emotional, and rooted in envy so old they forgot when it began. Someone wanted you broken because your existence made them uncomfortable. Someone wanted you quiet because your presence made them feel small. Someone wanted you destabilized because your clarity highlighted their confusion. These weren't strategic decisions, these were emotional outbursts disguised as planning. The explosive part is that the next confessions won't occur in controlled settings, in private meetings and rooms full of co-conspirators, in conversations they didn't mean to have, in moments of unintentional honesty sparked by stress. Exposure won't be linear, it will be chaotic, spreading like fire along every dry edge of their conscience. You'll see it soon. The people who once avoided you will suddenly become overly friendly. The people who once whispered about you will avoid eye contact. The guilt will show in their timing. The truth will leak from their inconsistencies. Keep an eye out. And the best part, the next bomb is already ticking. Not a bomb you placed, not a bomb you activated, but a bomb built from their own lies, strapped together by their own panic and lit by their own desperation. When it detonates, the names you hear next will change the entire context of what was done to you. Because the next layer exposes the motive behind the motive. The person who wasn't just involved, but who initiated the emotional tone of the attack. The real puppeteer. The one whose insecurity infected the entire group. This individual, the one hiding behind subtlety, behind influence, behind a carefully curated image. It is the not the one who snapped, not the assistant who panicked, not the accidental recruit who followed orders. No, this one is the quiet architect, the person whose presence warped the behavior of everyone around them, the person whose jealousy turned into strategy, the person whose resentment grew fangs. They were terrified of you long before the plan had a name, terrified of how easily people respected you, terrified of how naturally you carried yourself, terrified that you didn't need theatrics to be relevant. Their insecurity was a quiet flame at first, manageable, ignorable, until you evolved in a way they couldn't match. They devised a plan to dim you, not because you were dangerous, but because you exposed their performance. They didn't want to destroy you, they wanted to shrink you. They wanted to show that they could control your story, and they wanted to feel powerful. However, something went wrong, and it was you. You didn't react as they had anticipated. You didn't give them the emotional collapse they wanted to point at, and instead of crumbling, you rose. Quietly, consistently, and purposefully. Their insecurity turned into obsession because nothing scares a puppeteer more than a puppet that cuts its own strings. The second bomb is inevitable because the group can no longer defend the puppeteer after the first confession, the room fracture, or the panic that infected their hierarchy. When a group disintegrates, the most powerful person becomes the easiest target. The people who once supported them will now expose them. The people who once feared them will now blame them. The people who once followed them will now drag them into the light to save themselves. Loyalty was never genuine among them. It was convenience masquerading as unity, and convenience fades under duress. The puppeteer will be exposed, but not in a dramatic way. through small leaks, nervous confessions, conversations where someone says a little too much, messages that are inadvertently forwarded, and patterns that finally make sense. Once the puppeteer is exposed, the entire structure they built, the manipulation, the narratives, and the hidden motivations will crumble under the weight of truth. And here's the twist they never anticipated. While the truth destroys them, it frees you. Their bomb hurts them, not you. Their lies become evidence, not damage. Their panic becomes your closure. They never anticipated the story ending this way. They thought they were writing a downfall, but instead they wrote their own. Because what they dropped, this full bomb of dirty truth about who targeted you, haunts them rather than you. You're not the one losing sleep. You're not the one to watch. And you're afraid of being exposed. You walked through this fire and came out clearer, sharper, more self-aware. They walked into their own chaos and came out scorched, shaking, looking for someone to blame. This is what they couldn't predict. The truth was never going to break you. It was going to break the ones who built the lie. And now that the dust is settling, something crucial becomes obvious. You didn't need confrontation. You didn't need to expose any noise. You simply needed to stand still and let their own actions reveal who they were. And they did, spectacularly. They dropped the bomb they designed for you, but it detonated in their hands, and in that blast, every hidden motive, every whispered plot, every concealed strategy became visible. They lost it all, trying to target someone who couldn't be broken. And you walk away with something never expected. The truth, not the watered-down, edited version, the full version. The truth, not the version they hid. The version they feared, the version that sets you free and traps them in the fallout they created. This isn't just closure, it's confirmation. The final stamp on a story you didn't start, but you sure as hell finished.